Gimmicks in fighting games. Do they belong? When one player has the ability to abuse a game's system just by simply existing, does it still allow a game to actually be competitive? Well, today we're going to talk about that. So first things first, let's define what a gimmick actually is. I took a look on Google and what they said, or what they stated, is that a gimmick is a plan of attack that requires the element of surprise or a lack of knowledge on the opponent's part. And although I partially agree with that, there is much more depth to what a gimmick is especially defined in today's day and age in fighting games. I think now that a much better definition of a gimmick is an underlying threat that is always present just by your character simply existing. For example, range, because your character is a distance demon, or super armor because your character is either super strong or has super armor on basically every single move. Just by simply existing, you are now putting your opponent in a position to play your game, and you now get to defy the laws of what the game truly is at its core. And I understand the fundamental rebuttal to my statement, and that is this: if every character has a gimmick, then the game is balanced. But here's the problem. The game no longer becomes a test of skill, but rather it becomes a test or knowledge check of what you actually know about the game. The fundamental idea of a fighting game is to have solid neutral, good whiff punishing, combos, and the ability to parry or block your opponent's attacks effectively. And in my opinion, I believe that that is how it should be. The better player should in fact win. However, one of the biggest and greatest gimmicks of all time in fighting games has to be super armor. And now I'll say in a game like Tekken, they give players power crushes, which is essentially a super armor move that every player has. However, there are some characters that have inherent super armor on their moves, and so you have to respect their options whether you want to or not. And although they give these special moves, these super armor moves, to a lot of characters that are deemed as low tier or terrible characters, the problem is not that it is unbeatable, but more so that it is teaching players how to play the game incorrectly, and thus giving them a crutch, making it borderline impossible for players to feel like they can switch and play a different character because now they need super armor. And the interesting thing about super armor specifically, I know we're kind of picking on this particular gimmick, but these particular gimmicks are given to characters that are typically terrible, and those terrible characters are called noob stomping characters, which means if you are a bad player, you will in fact most likely lose to super armor. And that's totally fair. If it's a slow move and it has to be blocked, in which case then you can whiff punish, then it is in fact balanced, and I fully understand that. But my argument isn't, is it beatable? The argument is, does it belong in fighting games? Because as one person is getting a fully, completely different experience and actually trying to learn the game and learn their neutral and combos and whiff punish and all that, there's a lot of players who get stuck at the bottom of the barrel because they pick up these noob stomping characters or very simple characters with gigantic slow moves that have super armor, and they don't actually learn how to play the game. They don't learn the importance of whiff punishing or spacing or even move selection to try and counter their opponent. Instead, they just say, I'm gonna throw out this move, and if you do a move at the same time, I'm gonna automatically win. Essentially, I don't have to care about how you play. And in which case they hit an undeniable ceiling where when someone is actually quite good and can play around your super armor, now what has always worked for possibly months or even years depending on your level now doesn't work, and you feel like you've wasted an insane amount of time. Another type of gimmick that is obviously an oversight, especially in older games, is infinites and exploiting the game's mechanics. In most cases, I will say that these types of gimmicks were not intentional, but it does in fact break the game, and of course, hopefully you can agree that this is a gimmick that should not belong in an actual competitive fighting game where you get touched one time and then it's just GG's. But on a more realistic note, one of the most infuriating gimmicks of all time is when one player has to infinitely respect the other because they have an unreactable combo starter or unreactable move that just straight up kills. What happens here is that the player who has to spend their entire time blocking, shielding, or reacting has to be so much better than their opponent just to go even. And so what a gimmick like this does is gives the player a false sense of skill where they think that their neutral is insane or their approach options are insane and they're just so good at the game, when realistically if you take away this one move, that player is potentially nothing. And here's the thing, I fully understand that as a roster expands in a video game, there are only so many different types of moves and characteristics or abilities that a character can possibly have. So eventually, yes, of course, I understand that you have to have characters that eventually have moves that low profile or have crazy range or projectiles or super armor or moves that heal. I fully understand that. But my question still stands, and that is, if a game inevitably has to go down that route, does it eventually become an uncompetitive game because of the variety? Does there come a point when there are so many characters with so many gimmicks that skill is no longer necessary to actually be competitive, but rather becoming an encyclopedia of bullshit gimmicks that you've memorized since the beginning of time, in which case the average player has no ability to actually catch up to you because of skill, but rather they have to go ahead and memorize an entire game and all the bullshit that comes with it. And so it becomes more important in what you know about the game rather than your ability to actually play the game. I don't think for a single second that if someone's been playing for 10 years and someone's been playing for 2 months, that they should be evenly matched or that the person who is the less experienced should even win ever. However, if 2 players have been playing for 10 years, let's just say, and one player has been playing one character, and the other player has been playing all the characters in the game, but their skill is substantially less, all they have to do to win is simply counterpick you to a character that you don't understand, and now all of a sudden, they just win every single game because you don't understand the core gimmicks of a character. And it truly is quite bullshit. I will say, as someone who's played a good handful of Tekken, I'm definitely not an incredible player at the game, but I will say that I should not be able to play my main character for several months and then pick up Eddie Gordo and face roll my way to the same rank as my main. And my point is this, it's not that Eddie Gordo is such an easy character that I can become a god with him, it's the fact that nobody knows what I'm doing, including myself, but based on his low profiling and very obscure animations, people just don't know what to do. And so while I'm breakdancing like an absolute moron, I'm somehow climbing to Red 2 against players who are actually trying to play the game properly. And so they're getting knowledge checked by an absolute gimmick, and I'm getting a rank that I absolutely do not deserve. And so if you're playing as a character that's handing you free wins based on your opponent's lack of knowledge, can you really say that that is skillful on your end? Does it even actually matter? I'm very curious as to your thoughts on how gimmicks actually play a part in fighting games. Because on the flip side, what happens is if a character's gimmicks are strong enough, that character becomes the meta, in which case everybody plays that one character, because of course, if you don't have a chance. I'll say a character like Smash 4 Bayo having Witch Time and Bat Within, or even Brawl Meta Knight, we all saw where these characters, they absolutely dominated the space and they redefined what it meant to play those games. And I'm sure you've heard people say things like Bayonetta or Eddie Gordo or X character, whoever it might be, is playing their own game. They don't have to play by the rules of how the game is designed. People say the same thing about Steve in Smash Ultimate, where Steve is not a Smash Ultimate character. He is playing his own game. And so we're kind of left in a weird stalemate ultimatum, and that is, if you take gimmicks out of a game, now the game becomes very boring or very plain or very simple, and some people might really like that. But if you keep gimmicks in a game, now the game is not balanced. It's genuinely not balanced, and it's very, very goofy or janky. If you're a Smash player, you throw that word around a lot. A game is absolutely jank. And for anyone who has never heard that term before, essentially what jank means is that stupid things happen for no reason, and sometimes you just win, or sometimes you just lose. And how do you explain it? It's just jank. Let me put it this way. Imagine you were watching an NBA basketball game, but one of the teams had a gigantic net that was also 2 feet shorter. Would you not say that is incredibly bullshit? And on top of that, the only reason why their net happens to be bigger and lower is because they happen to choose to go that direction. They happen to be playing in that direction, going down the court, and that's just how it is. And when we switch to the other side of the court, we also switch the net as well. So no matter what, one team just has a massive advantage because they said so. And if the other team complained that this is not fair, the rebuttal from the team that's using a gimmick just simply says, you can change your net too. Why don't you just change your net and make it lower, and we'll have a even game of bullshit essentially. But now you have to ask the question, Are we actually playing basketball still at the highest level in the NBA? Or are we just playing a game of gimmicks where now people are doing 360 through the leg dunks, shooting from half court with their eyes closed because it's just a giant net and it's super easy? Or is the competitive integrity now taken away from the game? And on top of that as well, imagine you were to now compare the stats of the players from this game to another set of players who are playing with traditional proper rules as far as having the regular size net and all that good stuff. Can you really say that they are playing the same game, or that the players who played with the proper rules are actually worse players because they didn't score nearly as many points? So let me know your comments down below. Do you think that gimmicks in fighting games destroy competitive integrity, or do you think it's just a part of the game, and if anything you encourage the variety and the challenge of understanding the nuances of a game? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. And once again, this is Trixx from Meta Smash saying thanks for watching the video.